Now that Sarah sat upon the throne of the Volksreich, it was time to deal with her sister and sole surviving sibling, Queen Rakia of Burgundy. Rakia was apt at working in the shadows, and during the power struggle between her brother and sister, she was able to acquire the title for herself. This would not do, as the Kaiserin wanted to consolidate power, giving the most loyal of vassals kingdoms to rule over, so she only had to keep them happy, instead of every count and duke in the realm, which had long been a failing of the Volksreich and the ultimate downfall of her brother. In the hopes of provoking her, Sarah appointed her sister Rakia as the court jester. Rakia realized this as a show of power against her and bided her time. She contacted those members of the former Revolt League which put Sarah in power, but were unsettled now by her characteristics as a ruler. Amongst this cabal, she began a rather unique campaign of subterfuge, which employed the use of foreign mercenary contracts from places like Pannonia and Novgorod, paying them in advance to await the promised time. In addition to this, Rakia sought funding from certain Mediterranean merchants who were interested in Volkish ports, agreeing upon lower tariffs in exchange for their financial support. Once again, time would indeed tell whether or not the investments which the various members of the Revolt League placed upon Rakia's shoulders would pay off. Meanwhile, as the dreaded plague continued to ravage the Volksreich, many began to blame the Jewry. Their exclusive communities, persistent traditions, and unknowable religion made them prime candidates for blame. Indeed, even the Albigensian matriarch Friedeswind had called for their expulsion. However, Kaiserin Sarah did what she could to save them, attempting to convince others that the plague was not their doing, even going as far as to send Volkish troops to crush pogroms. She used the precedent of Amadeus to this end. How he refused to burn heretics, so she refused to drive out the Jews. Much speculation was born out of this decision, and Kaiserin Sarah offered them no answer. Many whispered, because Sarah did indeed burn heretics herself on some occasion when she was Queen of Burgundy, so what was different now? Had she changed as a person? A woman of mercy? Had she a lover amongst the Jews? Or perhaps she found some usefulness among them? She never divulged her true reasoning, but what was most likely the case was her use of the Radonite trade network, made up entirely of Jews, to help pay off her initial war debts incurred in the conflict against her brother, and gather funds in preparation to counter her final remaining sibling. Whatever the reasoning, her position caused European Jewry to flock to the Volksreich, viewing it as a safe haven, especially from places like Sicilia, from where they were recently expelled, or the various kingdoms of Iberia, where the Catholics and Moors despised them in even measure. In order to be seen by her people as an active and beneficent Kaiserin, Sarah began an expansion of the apothecary presence in the Volksreich. Her upsizing was modest, but this was not the most major reform of hers in this respect. What was most significant in this reform was the linking of apothecaries to other regional ones, in order to allow them to expand their basic coverage and trade knowledge between them. This network of apothecaries proved very useful in the treatment of various ills, but more importantly were able to police corpse disposal with the authority of the crown. No more bodies laying about in fields, or worse yet, cities, unburied and unburnt. Now, neat pyramids of a grim sort would burn throughout the night. Meanwhile, on the 16th of June 1077, fortune struck, and Tanist Rakia was killed by the bite of a viper at the age of 20, forced to leave her titles to her sister, Kaiserin Sarah. Mercifully, bloodshed on a massive scale was avoided, and now Sarah had put together all the pieces of her crown. As for the members of the Revolt League and Rakia's various contacts, they were never found out and receded into their disparate roles in life. On the 3rd of September 1077, Pope Leo IV declared war on the Volksreich to conquer the provinces of Latium, which surrounded Rome, that Volkish armies conquered from the Ptolemy Sultanate long ago. The Catholic zealots raised an army of nearly 4,000 men and swiftly conquered the surrounding provinces. To be fair, the Italian peninsula was not seen as an area of much concern after the war, and as such many of them were in Burgundy, preparing for a war that wouldn't come. However, when the armies from Burgundy arrived, Pope Leo IV was shown his foolish mistake. In the ensuing months, dozens of battles would be fought and easily won by the Volkish army. Kaiserine Sarah utilized her soldiers' knowledge of the terrain, which they learned during the war against her brother, and applied it here. One such encounter was the Battle of Valle de Rosso, where Commander Valgraven allowed his army to walk into a trap, Catholics perched above on the sides of a valley. As they came rushing down the steep slopes, the Volkish men dug in and pointed their spears upward at the advancing men. Many of them had gained too much momentum, and dozens were speared upon them. Then the slaughter began, and they were unable to climb out of this bowl of blood that they had made. When Rome was surrounded, everybody expected a protracted siege. Pope Leo IV, remembering the tactics used to best the Ptolemy, he had a chain dragged across the harbor, disallowing any unapproved naval access. The walls were still standing tall and strong, and the Catholics were confident they could outlast the Volkish resolve. However, Kaiserine Sarah herself was commanding this particular army, and she was cunning. She ordered large tents to be strung across their encampment and had her men dig. And dig they did. Trowels, swords, even bare hands beating the earth and gouging down into it. In the meanwhile, she had her archers and siege engines fire regularly upon the city, distracting it. The Pope believed they were building some new weapon beneath the tents, but had faith in the city's wherewithal. Kaiserine Sarah forced certain locals to assist in the digging, and then to descend into the hole and begin the construction of a mine. After months of digging, the men were growing weary, and the papists were freshly supplied with fish and wine, loudly celebrating from within their sacred city. On the 19th of August, 1078, during quiet afternoon prayers, a portion of the wall collapsed straight into the earth, seemingly an act of God. A thin, even strip of dirt filling some underground void all the way back up to the Volkish camp. This tunnel collapse wasn't planned, and the Volkish men underground were killed instantly, but Kaiserine Sarah didn't let that show. She commanded the Volkish men on the hill to rush the gap, and the stunned defense that the Catholics raised was dashed almost immediately. An Albigensian army sacked the center of the Catholic world, devastating papal authority once again. Soldiers streamed through the city, pillaging shops and looting churches. The heart of Catholicism itself was ground underfoot by Kaiserine Sarah the Cruel, even razing St. Peter's to the ground. The Pope was put on trial and asked to renounce his flawed doctrine by Matriarch Friedeswind. He refused and spat in her face. After his fiery and impotent polemic, Pope Leo IV was sentenced to death by deprivation, taken to Schwarzburg and left in an iron cage hanging from the Grand Cathedral of St. Reiner the Zealot, where he died. A new pope was elected in exile from one of the cardinals that escaped the siege of Rome, calling himself Pope Innocentus V. Court chaplain Sister Verena was sent to proselytize to subjugated Rome. A captive audience, indeed. On the 26th of February, 1079, Matriarch Friedeswind was succeeded by Patriarch Erhard. By this time, the plague had burned itself out, leaving the Volksreich in peace, and the other, more common diseases to continue their throttling of lives.